Tonight, President Trump has issued sweeping pardons for several key allies who backed his effort to subvert the 2020 election results. That's according to the president's so-called clemency czar, Justice Department pardon attorney Ed Martin, who released a list on social media late last night that includes the names of 77 people who received pardons.
Señores, lo que acaba de pasar con Donald Trump y el Congreso de los Estados Unidos es de esas cosas que uno piensa. ¿Cómo es que puede seguir saliéndole todo tan mal, incluso cuando le regalan una oportunidad? Porque sí, amigos, incluso luego de que 8 demócratas prácticamente se hayan rendido en esta pelea por el cierre de gobierno, gracias a un liderazgo bastante débil de Chuck Schumer, Donald Trump igual logró arruinarlo todo. Literalmente le dieron un regalo político y aún así le salió el tiro por la culata. Y créanme, amigos, que la razón de fondo es mucho más oscura de lo que parece. Y es que todo gira alrededor de los archivos de Epstein. Pero bueno, veamos. Este cierre de gobierno no solo fue un tema de presupuesto. Fue lo que algunos están llamando como el cierre de gobierno de Epstein. Donald Trump quería usarlo como una cortina de humo, para que la gente sintiera el impacto económico, ¿no? Y que los millonarios pudieran recibir más recortes de impuestos. Pero también está lo más importante para mí, que es mantener ocultos los archivos de Epstein. Solo que al parecer las cosas se complicaron, y bastante, ¿no? Al final del cierre, estos documentos van a estar nuevamente sobre la mesa. Y eso lo tiene en modo pánico total. Y claro, ¿qué es lo que hace Trump cuando está acorralado? Empieza a repartir indultos, como si fueran caramelos. Perdones a horas de la medianoche, firmados a toda prisa y con un ojo. Y que hoy, amigos, vamos a analizar. Antes de que hablemos de estos indultos, escandalosos por cierto, y de cómo es que el tema de Epstein, ¿no?, vuelve a perseguirlo, hay que entender cómo es que terminamos en este punto. Y el motivo por el cual los demócratas hace 2 días cedieron tan fácilmente. Lo cierto es que hay mucha frustración, incluso dentro del propio partido. Por ejemplo, el senador Chris Murphy lo ha explicado perfectamente. Escuchemos.
The vote hasn't closed, but it looks like 8 Democrats have joined Republicans to vote for a temporary reopening of the government for about 2 months, but a bill with no protections to stop the coming healthcare disaster in this country caused by Donald Trump's premium increases, nor any provisions to meaningfully stop Trump's corruption and his illegality. You can see how tired I am. I've been here all weekend. I've been working throughout the past few weeks to try to prevent this moment. After the elections on Tuesday, it just became absolutely clear that the American people do not want Democrats to be bullied into submission. They want Democrats to fight for their health care. They want Democrats to fight Trump's illegality. Bullies gain power when righteous people yield in the face of their wrongdoing. I didn't want this shutdown. I want it to end, but not at any cost. And of course, I wish that there was a path to saving this democracy and saving people's health care that didn't involve pain. This shutdown hurt. It did. But unfortunately, I don't think there is a way to save this country, to save our democracy, without there being some difficult, hard moments along the way. The people came out on Tuesday in huge numbers, and yes, it was a referendum on Trump, but it was also a referendum on us. And I think there's going to be a lot of very angry people out there in this country. I know there will be a lot of angry people out there in this country, having watched just a handful of Democrats join with Republicans. And we still have fights ahead where we've got to be able to unite as Democrats. This won't be the only consequential moment between now and next November. But there's no way to defend this.
Y claro que tienes razón. Los trabajadores federales estuvieron sufriendo durante más de 40 días por una pelea que al final no dejó ninguna victoria clara. Muchos demócratas pensaron que iban a ganar en la narrativa, que bastaba con culpar a los republicanos, mantener la moral alta, pero ¿cuál es la realidad? El costo político fue enorme. Lo peor, Donald Trump salió de todo esto más debilitado, pero no por mérito de los demócratas, sino por su propio caos interno. Porque ahora, con el Congreso de vuelta en sesión, el escándalo de Epstein regresa al centro del debate. El periodista Jim Acosta lo resumió así anoche. Los archivos de Epstein están otra vez sobre la mesa. No hay nada que Trump pueda hacer. El presidente de la Cámara, Mike Johnson, ya no tiene excusas. Se necesitan 218 firmas. Y ya están prácticamente listas, ¿no? Mientras tanto, Donald Trump actúa como si no tuviera nada que perder, repartiendo indultos a sus aliados, incluyendo, y atención, para uno específico, Rudy Giuliani.
President Trump has issued sweeping pardons for several key allies who backed his effort to subvert the 2020 election results. That's according to the president's so-called clemency czar, Justice Department pardon attorney Ed Martin, who released a list on social media late last night that includes the names of 77 people who received pardons. They include Rudy Giuliani, Mark Meadows, John Eastman, Kenneth Chesebro, Boris Epstein, and Sidney Powell, among others. Now, Politico points out that the pardons are largely symbolic because none of those identified were charged with any federal crimes. Additionally, the document posted online is also undated, so it's not clear exactly when President Trump signed it. The pardon language explicitly states it does not apply to Trump himself. The White House and Justice Department did not immediately respond to requests for comment. So, Ken, there's a lot to sift through here. We know that President Trump has stacked his administration with some of those previous 2020 election deniers, those who claim falsely that he won the election. And symbolic or not, this is another symbol here that he's simply not going to play by the rules, and that these are people who he is yet another example in this administration where he has used the powers of government to punish his foes, and in this case, reward his friends, those who do his bidding.
I would say it's a bit more than symbolic, Jonathan, in the sense that some of these people were clearly considered unindicted co-conspirators by Jack Smith in the investigation of the false elector scheme that resulted in the indictment of Donald Trump. And they were certainly at risk of being charged federally. Now, of course, that was never going to happen during this administration, and there's a statute of limitations problem. But often there are ways to get around statutes of limitations. And so some of these people had some real risk of being charged criminally in the false elector scheme if a Democrat or someone who's not like-minded with Donald Trump becomes the next president and controls the Justice Department. So this is a big deal, and it's just a continuation of what is happening within the Trump administration in terms of pardoning people who've committed very serious offenses. In this case, haven't been charged with offenses, but are believed by many people to have engaged in misconduct. And just it's about the political whims of Donald Trump. It's about who he likes and who he wants to help. And if you believe a certain way that was in his interests, you're liable for a pardon, whether it's Ghislaine Maxwell or people who engaged in this false elector scheme. Now, the thing to remember is there were state attorneys general investigations into various false elector schemes around the country. It's unclear exactly what's happening with those, but these pardons, of course, would not apply to state charges.
Señores, el mismísimo Rudy Giuliani, el que fue su abogado personal, cómplice en casi todos los escándalos. Aquí hay una pregunta muy interesante y es, ¿de verdad alguien puede seguir confiando en Trump de mantener sus promesas? Porque lo que estamos viendo es una mezcla de desesperación, autoprotección, caos puro. Y ojo, no se trata solo de Trump. El líder demócrata también falló. Chuck Schumer permitió que un grupo de senadores, en teoría seguros, los que no se enfrentan a elecciones hasta dentro de años, fueran los que cargaran con la responsabilidad del voto a favor del acuerdo. Y luego él, como si nada, se lava las manos diciendo, yo voté en contra. Señores, este es el tipo de maniobra que la gente nota, lo cual termina destruyendo la confianza en su partido. Lo dijo muy bien un comentarista esta mañana: la pérdida de confianza que se generó daña a todos los demócratas, no solo a los que votaron a favor del acuerdo. Y eso se siente, ¿no? Porque hace apenas unos días muchos estaban con positivismo, ¿no? Había una sensación de que las cosas tal vez iban a salir mejor, pero bueno, la jugada política apagó por completo ese impulso. Bernie Sanders también lo dejó muy claro: si el partido no puede recuperar la confianza de la gente, no se puede ganar. Y si no se puede ganar, no puede defender las causas progresistas. No van a poder defender la reforma al sistema de salud. Peor, la desigualdad. Escuchemos lo que dijo.
Are going to see at least a doubling in their premiums in the Affordable Care Act. In my state of Vermont and throughout this country, for certain groups of people, it will be a tripling and a quadrupling of their premiums. There are people who will now be paying 50% of their limited incomes for health care. Does anybody in the world think that makes sense? And if this resolution is passed tonight, we are on a pathway to throw 15 million Americans off of Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. 15 million. Our job is to create universal health care. Guarantee health care to every man, woman, and child, not throw 15 million people off the health care they have, low-income and working-class people. And my friends, know what you are voting on. Studies are out there that when you throw 15 million people off of health care, some 50,000 of our fellow Americans will die unnecessarily every single year. Anyone think that's funny? Something to laugh at? Something to just go past? I don't. 50,000 Americans die unnecessarily.
Eso, señores, es el verdadero problema. Sin confianza ya no hay poder político. Así que sí, Donald Trump vuelve a estar en el ojo del huracán con el tema de Epstein. Estos indultos de medianoche, ¿no? El caos económico que está dejando a su paso. Y todo esto, señores, todo esto tiene repercusiones. Por ejemplo, quiero que hablemos de un tema justamente que quería añadir con esto, ¿no? Un tema muy interesante y, como lo mencioné, de repercusión común a partir de ahora en los Estados Unidos. Esto lo van a ver muy seguido. Un juez federal con más de 40 años de carrera acaba de renunciar. Y no ha renunciado porque se quiera jubilar, no, señores. Renunció porque ya no soporta ver cómo Trump destruye el Estado de Derecho. Él mismo lo dijo. Un juez que fue nombrado por Ronald Reagan. Así, señores, juez republicano de la vieja escuela. Acaba de decir: el silencio me resulta intolerable. No es un activista, no es un demócrata. Mark Wolf, juez que dedicó toda su vida a defender la ley, juez conservador. Y bueno, lo que lo llevó a renunciar, Donald Trump. Este juez federal publicó en una carta dirigida para el portal The Atlantic, donde explicó que ya no podía quedarse callado mientras Trump convertía la ley en un arma para proteger a sus amigos, para castigar a sus enemigos. Y dijo literalmente: el silencio para mí es intolerable. Lo más grave es que su denuncia llega justo, ¿no?, cuando Donald Trump comenzó su cacería de brujas, como él lo dice, ¿no? Comenzó a perseguir a sus oponentes. Comenzó a perdonar a sus aliados, los involucrados en la insurrección y los involucrados en todos los escándalos. Pero bueno, señores, escuchemos qué es lo que dice y veremos punto por punto.
In the battle to salvage whatever it is that remains of the rule of law in America, it just may go down as one of those shots heard around the world. And the news wasn't extraordinary because of what he was doing and retiring. It is how he did it. After 40 years on the bench, a federal judge appointed by Ronald Reagan with decades of experience overseeing criminal cases of mobsters and lawmakers alike is retiring from the bench so that he can sound the alarm. and take a stand against Donald Trump's assault on the rule of law in America. Former federal judge Mark L. Wolf writes this in The Atlantic over the weekend, quote, "I no longer can bear to be restrained by what judges can say publicly or do outside the courtroom. President Donald Trump is using the law for partisan purposes, targeting his adversaries while sparing his friends and donors from investigation, prosecution, and possible punishment. This is contrary to everything that I have stood for in my more than 50 years in the Department of Justice and on the bench. The White House's assault on the rule of law is so deeply disturbing to me that I feel compelled to speak out. Silence, for me, is now intolerable." Judge Wolf's point of no return moment comes when Donald Trump's efforts and campaign to destroy the rule of law is coming at us fast and furiously, with disturbing new developments every single day. Today, there's brand new reporting on the Trump administration testing a favorite conspiracy theory of Donald Trump's in a court of law. New York Times reporting this, quote, "Far-right influencers have been hinting in recent weeks that they have finally found a venue in Miami and a federal prosecutor in Jason A. Redding Quinones to pursue long-promised charges of a quote-unquote grand conspiracy against Donald Trump's adversaries. Their theory of the case, still unsupported by the evidence, that a cabal of Democrats and deep state operatives, possibly led by President Barack Obama, has worked to destroy Trump in a years-long plot spanning the inquiry into his 2016 campaign to the charges he faced after leaving office. MSNBC is reporting that more than 30 subpoenas have been issued, including for former director of the CIA, John Brennan. Not only has John Brennan denied any wrongdoing, but 2 previous investigations have failed to find any evidence of any crimes in the way the Russia investigation was handled or pursued. Neither John Durham, the special counsel handpicked and appointed by Donald Trump's attorney general in his first term, Bill Barr, nor the bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee investigation, chaired by none other than Donald Trump's now Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, found anything that hinted at or merited criminal investigation or prosecution. But if prosecuting his political critics and opponents is one side of this ugly coin, quote, sparing his friends and donors from investigation, prosecution, and possible punishment, as Judge Wolf writes, is the other. Announced over the weekend, pardons by Donald Trump for scores of his allies, the ones involved in the plot to overturn his 2020 election defeat. 77 pardons in total, from those who served as fake electors in swing states all the way up to Trump's former Attorney General Rudy Giuliani and his former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. None of those people pardoned actually faced federal charges, but the signal is loud and clear, isn't it? Stick with Donald Trump and get your own get-out-of-jail-free card. It is a part of an alarming and dangerous pattern on the part of Donald Trump and his administration. As Judge Wolf writes, quote, "What Nixon did episodically and covertly, knowing it was illegal or improper, Donald Trump now does routinely and overtly." Resisting Donald Trump's assault on the rule of law is where we start today with former United States District Judge Mark Wolf. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and to some of the American people.
What have the last 36 hours been like since your piece in The Atlantic dropped?
It's been a whirlwind. For the last 45 years as a federal prosecutor, as the last 40 of those as a federal judge, I've been limited to what I can say, to what I properly say in the courtroom. I've been overwhelmed by the reaction to my piece in The Atlantic, including the invitation to speak with you. It's been very encouraging in a way, because as you saw in my piece, I expressed some skepticism about what I'm striving to do in this new chapter will be successful, although I think it's important to try and to work with many others to try to protect our rule of law and democracy in the United States. The response I've received gives me greater hope than I had 36 hours ago.
One of the things that I worked in the government, and one of the things that I understand from covering the Trump story for 9 years, well, one is that my brain will probably be studied for having to cover the Trump story for 9 years. But the other is that for every person like you, for whom entering the public debates around policy and politics was once unthought of, there are hundreds, and probably in your case, thousands others. Can you just tell me what the judiciary as a body, as an institution, experiences when there are threats and menacing tweets and posts coming at them, to say nothing of the actual intimation of violence, pizzas sent in the name of Judge Esther Salas's murdered son, Daniel? I mean, the climate is almost impossible to adequately cover, but what has it been like these last 9 months for judges?
The experience of being threatened is deeply disturbing. Those of us who become federal judges to varying degrees, and maybe me because I came from being a federal prosecutor to a higher degree, understand that it comes with the territory. And while it's very disturbing to us, it's particularly disturbing to members of our family who didn't sign up for this. I've been threatened in the past by people who are crazy, and also by others who were, I believe, were in positions of official responsibility. And I don't think that the threats affect how any judge performs his or her work, but it does make it more difficult, more anxious, and particularly imposes harms or anxieties on people close to us.
What is your message to the American people about the importance of the judiciary when you see the Congress? And let's leave aside their policy preferences, but their abdication of the functions of Congress, whether it's making declarations of war or making decisions about tariffs. What burden does that place on the judiciary?
I think it imposes an even higher responsibility on the judiciary to properly perform its functions. As you know, Nicole, our Constitution is based on Lord Acton's axiom, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And therefore, we have a system that divides power and creates checks and balances. Under the Constitution, under the Declaration of Independence and Constitution, all power is in the people of the United States. Some of that power is delegated to elected officials, and it's the role of the courts to hold those officials to the limits of their power. It's also a shared responsibility with the Congress, and while I'm not a political I think that there's fair criticism that Congress has not served as intended as an effective check or balance for the executive, but has been abdicating some of its responsibilities, and that makes the proper functioning of the courts even more important now than it always is.
Pues bueno, señores, Mark Wolf no está renunciando por cansancio, no es por jubilación. Renuncia porque ve que la base misma de la democracia está siendo destruida. Siente que seguir en silencio lo convierte en cómplice. Solo pensemos en esto, un juez nombrado por Reagan, alguien con credenciales conservadoras, de la vieja escuela. Está diciendo que Trump está usando el poder judicial para castigar a sus enemigos y para premiar a sus aliados. Ya no es política partidista. Esto es una denuncia de corrupción institucional. Donald Trump siempre ha usado la justicia como esta herramienta personal. Esto lo vimos también en su primer mandato, ¿no? Solo que en esta ocasión es el doble o el triple, ¿no? Si un juez lo critica, lo ataca en redes. Si un fiscal lo investiga, si lo llama enemigo del pueblo. Y ahora, él promete utilizar el Departamento de Justicia como su arma política. Ojo que algunos seguramente me van a decir que, bueno, los demócratas también investigaron a Trump, ¿no? Pero señores, esas investigaciones se basaron en evidencia, en procesos legales, no en una venganza personal. O sea, lo que este hombre está denunciando al renunciar es que Trump no busca justicia, busca su vendetta, su venganza, ¿no? Además, el juez menciona un punto clave también, y es que es algo que hemos visto esos días. El Congreso ya no cumple una función de contrapeso. Una parte del Congreso republicano, en otras palabras, se ha convertido en el escudo para Donald Trump. Y están más que dispuestos a justificar cualquier abuso, con tal de querer seguir en el poder. Eso, una vez más, nos deja en evidencia, ¿no?, cómo el sistema judicial, que es la última barrera en este momento, ¿no?, se está quebrando. Y ya les aseguro, lo que viene después es puro caos. Lo que está pasando, amigos, no solo es un drama político, aquí es un punto de quiebre que tenemos en la historia institucional de los Estados Unidos. Un juez que sirvió por 4 décadas, bajo gobiernos de ambos partidos, y nos está diciendo que el Estado de Derecho está siendo atacado desde adentro, y que el silencio, ese silencio de los jueces, de los fiscales, también de los ciudadanos, ¿por qué no?, ya no puede continuar. Cuando la ley se utiliza para castigar enemigos y para perdonar aliados, ya no es democracia. Es dictadura, pero con otro nombre. Pero bueno, ¿qué opinan ustedes? ¿Creen que estamos viendo el principio de un colapso en el sistema judicial estadounidense? ¿Será que aún hay algún tipo de esperanza para poder frenar este autoritarismo antes de que sea demasiado tarde? Los leo en los comentarios. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarme en este video. Recuerden, como siempre, déjame tu like, comparte el contenido y suscríbete al canal. Nos vemos en el próximo video. Hasta luego.